The idea of emergence is the idea that a whole can show patterns that are not obvious when only the parts are looked at. It is the idea that a flock of birds can move as one, that a soup can taste different from the sum of its ingredients, and that a mind can feel more than the activity of neurons. This section will walk through the early roots of the idea, give clear examples, show the main arguments, present two common objections, and point to where the story goes next in the series on complexity and consciousness. Aristotle first talked about the relationship between parts and whole in his work, Metaphysics. He wrote that the whole is not merely the sum of its parts. In plain language, Aristotle meant that a thing can have a character that does not belong to any single piece. He used the example of a statue. The marble alone is just stone. When a sculptor shapes it, the statue appears. The statue can make people feel awe, but the stone by itself cannot. Aristotle's point was that the shape, the purpose, and the feeling belong to the whole, not to the raw material. Centuries later, John Stuart Mill took up the same question in his System of Logic. He wrote, "The whole is not simply the sum of its elements, but a new entity, a new quality." Mill was interested in how science could explain complex things. He argued that when elements combine, they can create a new quality that cannot be predicted by looking at each element alone. Mill's words give a clear early statement that the idea of emergence has been part of philosophy for a long time. To see emergence in everyday life, imagine a flock of starlings at dusk. Each bird follows simple rules. Stay close to neighbors, match their speed, avoid collisions. No bird has a plan for the whole shape. Yet the group can swirl, split, and reform in patterns that look like a living cloud. The pattern is not written in any single bird's mind. It appears only when the birds interact. The pattern can change in seconds, and it can surprise an observer. This is a vivid example of emergence. Now think of a kitchen recipe for a simple vegetable soup. The ingredients are carrots, onions, water, salt, and a few herbs. Each ingredient has its own taste. When they are boiled together, the soup takes on a flavor that is richer than the sum of the separate tastes. The heat changes the chemicals, the herbs release oils, the vegetables soften and blend. The final dish can comfort a tired person, can bring back a memory, and can be called home. The comfort is not a property of any single carrot or onion. It is a quality that emerges from the cooking process. Both examples show the same pattern. Simple parts follow easy rules, and a larger pattern appears that cannot be traced back to any one part alone. The pattern is a property of the whole system, not of any individual piece. The main argument for emergence starts with the observation that many systems behave in ways that are unpredictable from the parts. The argument can be broken into 3 steps. First, identify the parts and their basic behavior. Second, observe the system when the parts interact. Third, note that the system shows a new behavior that cannot be reduced to the parts. When these steps line up, the claim is that emergence is present. One classic way philosophers phrase the claim is, if the behavior of the whole cannot be deduced from the behavior of the parts, then the whole has emergent properties. The claim does not say that the parts are unimportant. It says that the parts alone do not tell the whole story. The whole has its own rules, its own language, its own way of being. 2 counter-arguments often appear in the discussion. The first says that the whole is just a sum of parts, and any new pattern can be explained by a more detailed look at the parts. This view is called reductionism. A reductionist might argue that the flock shape can be predicted if one knows the exact neural wiring of each bird and the precise physics of the air. In the soup example, a reductionist would say that the taste can be calculated if one knows the exact chemical composition of each ingredient and the temperature curve of the pot. The reductionist believes that the new quality is only an illusion caused by limited knowledge. The second counter-argument comes from the idea of supervenience. Supervenience says that any change in the whole must be matched by a change in at least one part. In this view, the whole never truly adds anything new. It merely reflects the state of its parts. A supervenient might quote the phrase, "The whole is nothing but the arrangement of its parts." They would argue that the flock's shape is just a different arrangement of birds, and the soup's flavor is just a different arrangement of molecules. The whole does not have any power beyond the parts. Both objections push back against the claim that emergence adds something new. They ask for a more detailed analysis before accepting that a new quality exists. The discussion in later sections on complexity will return to these objections and test them with modern science. A historical anecdote from ancient Greece helps illustrate how the idea of whole versus parts was already alive. The philosopher Anaxagoras once told a story about a pot of honey. He said that the honey's sweetness could not be found in any single grain of sand that might fall into the pot. The sweetness belonged to the honey itself, not to any tiny piece. This story was used by later thinkers to argue that some qualities belong to the whole mixture, not to any single component. The story shows that even in the early days of philosophy, people were aware that mixtures could have properties that were not present in the ingredients. A second anecdote comes from the 19th century steam engine workshop in Manchester. Engineers were building large engines by assembling many iron parts: pistons, rods, valves, and boilers. When the engine was first run, the workshop workers were amazed by the steady rhythm and the power that emerged. One engineer wrote in his journal, "The engine breathes as a living thing, though each bolt is cold metal." The journal entry captured the feeling that the working engine seemed to have a life of its own, a quality that none of the bolts possessed alone. This experience helped spark the industrial age's interest in how large machines could do more than the sum of their parts. These two anecdotes show that the question of whole versus parts has been on the minds of thinkers for a long time. The Greek story looks at natural mixtures, while the steam workshop looks at human-made machines. Both point to a pattern that emerges when many simple pieces work together. To make the idea even clearer, another everyday example can be added: a school of fish. Like the flock of birds, each fish follows a rule to stay close to its neighbors and to turn when the group turns. The school can move as a single unit, avoid predators, and find food efficiently. No single fish decides the shape of the school. The shape appears only when many fish interact. The school's movement is a pattern that emerges from simple behavior. A second additional example is a game of Lego bricks. Each brick has a simple shape and can connect to others. When a child builds a castle, the castle can have towers, doors, and a story. The castle can be imagined as a kingdom, can be defended, can be explored. The story and the kingdom are not properties of any single brick. They appear only when the bricks are assembled in a particular way. The Lego castle illustrates how a new meaning can emerge from simple parts. The concept of emergence also appears in modern science. In physics, the behavior of a gas can be described by temperature and pressure, even though no single molecule has a temperature. Temperature is an emergent property. In biology, life itself is often described as an emergent property of chemistry. In computer science, a neural network can learn to recognize faces, even though each artificial neuron only does a simple calculation. These modern examples will be explored in later sections that look at complexity and consciousness. When the discussion moves to complexity, the focus will shift to how many parts can interact in many ways, creating layers of patterns. Complexity builds on emergence by adding more levels. When the discussion moves to consciousness, the question will be whether the mind is an emergent property of brain activity. The earlier examples of flocks, soups, fish, and Lego will serve as simple analogies for those deeper questions. A quote from Aristotle that often appears in textbooks is, "The whole is greater than the sum of its parts." Although the exact wording varies, the idea is the same. Aristotle's words remind the listener that the whole can have a character that the parts lack. A quote from John Stuart Mill that fits the theme is, "The whole is not simply the sum of its elements, but a new entity, a new quality." Mill's sentence makes clear that new qualities can appear when things combine. To wrap up this segment, the main points can be listed in plain language. First, emergence means that larger patterns can appear from simple parts. Second, early philosophers like Aristotle and Mill already talked about this idea. Third, everyday examples like flocks of birds and kitchen recipes show how the idea works in real life. Fourth, there are two strong objections. Reductionism, which wants to explain everything by looking deeper at the parts, and supervenience, which says the whole never adds anything new. Fifth, historical stories from ancient Greece and the steam engine workshop show that the question has been around for a long time. Sixth, later sections on complexity and consciousness will take these ideas further and test them with modern science. The listener can keep these ideas in mind while watching the next part of the series. The next part will look at how many interacting parts can create even richer patterns, and how those patterns might give rise to thoughts and feelings. The journey from simple rules to complex mind will start with the simple truth that a whole can be more than the sum of its parts. The story of emergence begins with a simple question. How can a whole show patterns that do not appear in any of its parts? The answer comes in two main flavors. One flavor is called weak emergence. The other is called strong emergence. The narrator will walk through each flavor, name the thinkers who helped shape them, give everyday examples, note the main objections, and share a couple of historic moments that show how the ideas grew. Weak emergence is the idea that a pattern can be seen when many simple parts follow clear rules. The pattern looks new, but it can be traced back to the rules if enough time and computing power are used. In other words, the whole does not hide any secret rule. The rule is there, but it is hard to see because many parts act together. The term was sharpened by philosophers such as Brian Scams. Scams wrote that a weakly emergent property is computable from the micro-level description given enough time and resources. The quote is simple. It says that the new pattern can be produced by running the small-scale rules on a computer. If a computer can simulate the whole, then the pattern is weakly emergent. A classic example of weak emergence is a traffic jam that forms on a highway. Each driver follows a few simple rules. The driver keeps a safe distance, speeds up when the road ahead is clear, and slows down when the car in front slows. No driver intends to create a jam. Yet, when many cars are close together, a small break can ripple back. The ripple grows into a stop and go wave that travels for miles. The wave is a pattern that no single driver created. The pattern can be reproduced by a computer program that only knows the simple driver rules. That makes the jam a weakly emergent phenomenon. Another everyday case is the game of telephone. In the game, a message is whispered from one person to the next. Each person repeats what they heard. The original sentence often turns into something quite different by the end. The rule each player follows is simple. Repeat the last phrase as best as possible. The final message can be funny, garbled, or even completely new. The change is a pattern that emerges from many tiny mishearings and mispronunciations. If a researcher writes a computer that imitates the whisper rule, the same distortion appears. That shows the game's result is weakly emergent. Strong emergence is a stronger claim. It says that some patterns cannot be reduced to the rules of the parts, no matter how much computing power is used. The pattern brings a new causal power that the parts do not have. In this view, the whole can push back on the parts. The idea was defended by Philip Anderson. Anderson wrote, "More is different. The behavior of a system at a higher level cannot be predicted from the behavior of its components." The quote points out that new laws can appear at higher levels. Those laws are not just hidden versions of the lower level laws. They are genuinely new. Strong emergence is often illustrated with the mind. A brain is made of neurons that fire according to electrical rules. Yet many philosophers argue that consciousness cannot be fully explained by those firing patterns. The claim is that consciousness has a causal role that cannot be traced back to any single neuron. That is a strong emergent claim. The claim says that the mental state can affect the physical state in a way that the physical rules alone do not predict. The railway signal system provides a historical anecdote that fits the strong emergence theme. In the early days of rail travel, many accidents happened because trains could not see each other on the track. Engineers tried to solve the problem by adding simple signals at stations. The first signals were just flags raised by a person. As traffic grew, a more complex system of colored lights and timed switches was invented. The new system allowed many trains to run safely on the same track. The whole network of signals created a safety level that no single flag could give. The system's reliability was more than the sum of its parts. Some historians argue that the railway signal network showed a new level of control that could not be predicted from the simple flag rule alone. That story helps to see how strong emergence can appear in technology. A second anecdote comes from the study of ant colonies in the early 1900s. Naturalists observed that ant hills could build elaborate tunnels, allocate workers to different tasks, and defend the nest without any ant acting as a leader. The scientists first thought each ant followed a secret plan. Later, they discovered that ants follow simple chemical trails and respond to local crowding. The colony's ability to build a massive structure and to allocate labor was still surprising. Some researchers called the colony's behavior a strong emergent property because the colony seemed to act as a single organism with goals that no single ant possessed. The early work on ants showed that a group can have a purpose that is not found in any individual. Even with these vivid stories, strong emergence faces two major objections. The first objection says that strong emergence is impossible because it would break the principle of causal closure. Causal closure means that every physical effect has a physical cause. If a higher level property can cause a lower level change, then there would be a cause that is not physical. That would conflict with the laws of physics. Critics argue that the claim, "the mind can cause the brain," violates this principle. Therefore, they say, strong emergence cannot exist. The second objection targets weak emergence. Some philosophers argue that calling something weakly emergent is just a polite way of saying that the underlying rules are hidden or too complex to see. They claim that weak emergence adds no new insight. It merely labels a difficult computation as emergent. In this view, every weakly emergent pattern is just a reminder that we have not yet found the exact rule. The label does not give any new explanatory power. The objection says that the term weak emergence is redundant. Both objections have been discussed in recent literature. Scarms responded to the causal closure objection by noting that strong emergence does not require a violation of physics if the higher level laws are themselves physical but not reducible. He wrote, "The higher level law can be physical while still being autonomous from lower level descriptions." The quote tries to show that autonomy does not mean breaking physics. Anderson answered the hidden rules objection by pointing out that many weakly emergent patterns are still useful even if they are hard to compute. He said, "The fact that a pattern can be simulated does not diminish its explanatory role. The quote argues that simulation is a tool, not a dismissal. Real-world applications of weak and strong emergence appear in many fields. In economics, market crashes can be modeled as weakly emergent. Each trader follows simple buying and selling rules. When many traders act together, a crash can appear. Simulations can reproduce the crash, showing weak emergence. In biology, the development of a multicellular organism can be seen as strongly emergent. The organism shows functions like respiration and thought that cannot be traced back to any single cell's rule. Doctors treat diseases by targeting the emergent level, not just the cells. In computer science, cellular automata, such as Conway's game of life, illustrate weak emergence. Each cell follows a tiny rule about its neighbors. Yet patterns like gliders and spaceships appear. Those patterns can be predicted by running the automaton on a computer, which matches the weak emergence definition. In philosophy of mind, the debate over consciousness often uses the strong emergence idea. Some philosophers claim that consciousness has causal powers that cannot be reduced to neural firings. They use the strong emergence label to argue for new mental laws. The next part of the video will turn to scientific case studies. It will look at experiments in physics, biology, and social science that show how emergent patterns are studied in practice. The narrator will guide the viewer through those studies, showing how the ideas of weak and strong emergence play out in real research. The transition will help connect the abstract discussion to concrete work. The story will continue with clear examples and simple language, keeping the calm tone that defines the channel. Emergence is the idea that a whole can show patterns that are not obvious from the parts alone. In nature, this means that a forest, a storm, or a living cell can act like a single mind, even though each piece follows simple rules. The basic definition will be recalled often, because it is the bridge to the next part that looks at math. The story of emergence begins with early naturalists who tried to explain how life builds itself. Charles Darwin wrote about how small changes add up over time to make big differences. In the second edition of On the Origin of Species, he said, "There is grandeur in this view of life, with its several powers, having been originally breathed into a few forms or into one." Darwin's view was that many tiny steps, each guided by natural selection, can create complex forms. Margaret Mead, a cultural anthropologist, later used a similar idea for human societies. She noted, "What we call culture is really a set of patterns that arise when many people interact." Both thinkers saw patterns growing from many small actions. When a rainforest canopy spreads out, the pattern of light and shade looks like a patchwork quilt. Each leaf follows a simple rule. Grow toward the light, avoid shade, and keep enough space for water. Yet the whole canopy becomes a layered roof that catches rain, stores carbon, and shelters animals. No single leaf decides the shape of the roof. The shape appears only when all the leaves work together. This is a clear case of emergence in biology. A snowflake shows another picture. Water molecules stick together in a hexagonal lattice. Each molecule follows the same rule of bonding. As the crystal falls through cold air, it meets different humidity levels. The pattern of branches grows in response to those tiny changes. The final snowflake has a unique design, but the rules that made it are the same for every crystal. The beautiful shape is not planned by any one molecule. It is the result of many small steps. These natural pictures help to see why some philosophers argue that emergence is a real force. One argument says that the whole has properties that cannot be reduced to the parts. In the canopy, the ability to store large amounts of carbon is a property of the forest, not of any single tree. In the snowflake, the six-fold symmetry is a property of the whole crystal, not of a single water molecule. The argument says that new rules appear when parts join together, and those new rules guide the system. A second argument points to self-organization. In a flock of starlings, each bird follows two simple rules: stay close to its neighbors and avoid collisions. In 1859, an observer named William H. Bates watched a murmuration over the English countryside. He wrote that the birds moved as if they were one giant shape, turning and swirling without a leader. The observer noted, "The birds seem to know where the others are, and they move as a single being." This story shows how a pattern can arise without a central commander. The flock's shape is an emergent property of the bird's simple interactions. Not everyone accepts that emergence adds something new. One counter-argument says that what looks like a pattern is really just chance. In weather, clouds may form shapes that look like animals, but the shapes are random. A critic might argue that the canopy's layers are simply the result of each plant trying to get light, not a new rule. The critic says that if the parts are understood, the whole can be fully explained, so there is no need for a special concept of emergence. Another counter-argument claims that hidden design, not emergence, creates the patterns. Some thinkers believe that an unseen plan or law guides the formation of snowflakes, forests, and flocks. They argue that the laws of physics or a designer set the stage, and the patterns follow those hidden instructions. In this view, emergence is just a label for a process that is already built into the universe. Real-world applications show why the debate matters. In ecosystem management, scientists use the idea of emergence to protect rainforests. They know that protecting a few key species can help the whole forest stay healthy, because the forest's ability to store carbon emerges from many interactions. In weather forecasting, models that include emergent behavior can predict storms more accurately. The models let small air currents interact, and the larger storm pattern appears from those tiny moves. Modern interpretations of emergence borrow ideas from complex systems science. Researchers study networks of nodes that follow simple rules, such as computers in the internet or neurons in the brain. They find that the network can solve problems, remember information, and change over time. This view links emergence to fields like biology, economics, and even art. The modern picture says that emergence is a bridge between the small and the large, between the simple and the complex. An analogy helps to see the idea. Imagine a kitchen where many cooks add ingredients to a pot. Each cook follows a recipe for a single spice. When the pot is done, the flavor is not any one spice, but the blend that emerges from all the additions. The blend cannot be traced to a single spice. It is a property of the whole mixture. This picture mirrors how a forest or a snowflake works. History gives more stories of surprise. In the 1930s, a biologist named TCHL studied slime mold, a simple organism that lives as a single cell but can join many cells into a moving blob. The researcher set up a maze with food at the end. The slime mold sent out many thin threads that explored the maze. When the food was found, the threads that led to the food stayed, while the others faded away. The slime mold solved the maze without a brain. The study showed that a group of simple cells can find the shortest path, a behavior that looks like planning. The anecdote shows emergence in a tiny creature. Another story comes from the study of fireflies. In the 1970s, scientists watched fireflies in Southeast Asia flash in perfect rhythm. Each firefly adjusts its timing based on the flashes of its neighbors. The whole group ends up flashing together, creating a wave of light across the forest. The synchronization is not directed by any firefly, yet the pattern spreads like a wave. The firefly story adds another example of how simple rules can make a big picture. These anecdotes support the view that emergence is real. They also show that the idea can be tested in the lab, not just thought about in philosophy. When the flock of starlings turned in the sky, when slime mold solved a maze, when fireflies lit up together, the patterns seemed to come from the bottom up. The discussion also touches on how people think about chance. In the flock, some might say the shape is just random motion, but the consistent shape across many flocks suggests a rule, not pure luck. In the slime mold, the path found is the shortest one, not a random walk. These cases make the chance argument weaker. The hidden design argument also faces challenges. If a designer set the rules, why do the rules change when conditions change? The canopy shifts its shape when a tree falls, and the snowflake changes its branches when humidity changes. The flexibility of the pattern suggests that the system adapts, not follows a fixed plan. The concept of emergence also helps to understand human culture. Margaret Mead's work on the islands of the Pacific showed that customs and rituals spread through many small interactions. A dance, a song, or a way of greeting can become a cultural pattern that looks like a single tradition, even though no one person invented it. The cultural pattern emerges from many people copying and modifying each other. In biology, the idea of emergence guides research on the human brain. Neurons fire according to simple electrical rules, yet consciousness seems to arise from the network of billions of neurons. Some scientists say consciousness is an emergent property, something new that cannot be found in any single neuron. Others argue it is just the sum of neural activity, a point of view that aligns with the hidden design or chance arguments. The rainforest canopy also shows how emergence matters for climate. The canopy controls how much water vapor goes into the air. When the canopy is healthy, it releases moisture that creates rain clouds. When the canopy is damaged, the cycle breaks, leading to drought. The pattern of rainfall emerges from the whole forest, not from any single tree. This real-world link shows why understanding emergence can help protect the planet. The snowflake example connects to technology. Engineers design microstructures that grow like crystals to make stronger materials. They use the same simple rules that water molecules follow, letting the pattern emerge on a tiny scale. The result is a material that is light but strong, a property that appears only when the pattern forms. Looking ahead, mathematics offers tools to study emergence. Equations that describe many simple parts can show how a pattern appears. In the next section, the script will move to those mathematical ideas, showing how formulas can capture the birth of a flock, a canopy, or a snowflake. To sum up, emergence in nature is seen in ecosystems, weather, and biology. The rainforest canopy, the snowflake, the murmuration of starlings, the slime mold maze, and the firefly flash all illustrate how simple parts can make a bigger picture. Charles Darwin and Margaret Mead gave early hints that many small changes can build great forms. Arguments for emergence point to new properties and self-organization. Counter-arguments claim chance or hidden design. Real-world uses range from conservation to technology. Modern science treats emergence as a bridge between the small and the large, and mathematics will soon give a clearer map of that bridge. The journey from simple rules to complex patterns continues, and the next part will explore the math that helps to describe it. Atoms are tiny pieces of matter that cannot be seen with the eye. When many of them come together, they make the world that can be touched, smelled, and heard. This is what the idea of emergence tries to explain. Emergence says that a group of simple parts can show new behavior that none of the parts show on their own. In physics and chemistry, the classic cases are solids, liquids, gases, and the way magnets pull iron filings. The story begins with the discovery of the electron in 1911. J.J. Thomson fired a stream of particles through a glass tube and saw that the beam was deflected by electric and magnetic fields. He wrote, "Well, the particle is a constituent of all matter. The electron turned out to be a building block that is far smaller than an atom." By the time the electron was known, scientists already knew that atoms could stick together in different ways. The new particle gave a clear picture of how tiny parts could combine to make larger things. A few decades later, Erwin Schrödinger wrote his famous wave equation in 1926. He showed that the behavior of an electron in an atom could be described by a mathematical wave. Schrödinger said, "The wave function contains all that can be known about the system." This idea helped explain why atoms have distinct energy levels, why they emit light of certain colors, and how they bond to form molecules. The equation works for a single atom, but when many atoms are placed side by side, the mathematics becomes much harder. New patterns appear that are not obvious from the single atom picture. One everyday example of emergence is water boiling. A pot of water contains billions of water molecules. Each molecule is made of 2 hydrogen atoms and 1 oxygen atom. The forces between molecules are weak, but they hold the liquid together. When the pot is heated, the molecules move faster. At a certain temperature, called the boiling point, the average kinetic energy becomes high enough that the weak forces can no longer keep the molecules together. The water changes into steam, a gas. The law that predicts the boiling point, such as the Clausius-Clapeyron relation, does not come from the behavior of a single molecule. It emerges from the collective motion of many molecules. A second everyday example is a simple bar magnet. A magnet is made of many iron atoms whose tiny magnetic moments tend to line up in the same direction. When the moments align, the magnet creates a field that can pull iron filings toward it. An individual iron atom has a magnetic moment, but a single atom does not attract a pile of iron filings. The attraction is an emergent property of the whole crystal. The law that describes this attraction, like the inverse square law of magnetism, works for the whole magnet, not for a lone atom. These examples show that new rules appear when many parts interact. Physicists call these new rules macroscopic laws. They are different from the microscopic laws that govern a single particle. Albert Einstein, in a 1905 paper on Brownian motion, wrote, "The observable motion of a particle suspended in a fluid is a direct consequence of the random hits it receives from the molecules of the fluid." Einstein used the random motion of tiny molecules to explain a visible, measurable jitter of a larger particle. This is a clear case where the large-scale behavior, the jitter, emerges from tiny, invisible hits. The idea of emergence is not just a story. It has practical uses. In chemistry, the concept helps design new materials. When polymer scientists in the 1950s created the first plastic polymers, they mixed many small molecules called monomers into long chains. The resulting plastic behaved very differently from the original monomers. It could be molded, it was lightweight, and it resisted water. The new properties, flexibility, durability, transparency, were emergent. The scientists could not predict them by looking at a single monomer. They had to study how the long chains moved together. This discovery opened the door to the modern world of plastic goods, from bottles to car parts. Modern researchers still use the idea of emergence. In condensed matter physics, the term quasiparticle describes a collective excitation that moves through a solid as if it were a particle. A phonon, for instance, is a packet of sound vibration that travels through a crystal lattice. No single atom is a phonon, but the coordinated motion of many atoms creates it. The phonon obeys its own set of rules, such as a specific speed of sound in the material. These rules are emergent because they arise only when many atoms vibrate together. Even in chemistry, the concept appears in the study of reaction networks. A simple reaction like A plus B follows a rate law that can be measured in the lab. When many such reactions link together in a metabolic pathway, the whole network can display oscillations, such as the famous Belousov-Vereshchevsky reaction. The oscillation is not a property of any single step. It emerges from the feedback loops among many steps. Two common objections challenge the value of emergent laws. The first objection says that emergent laws are only approximations. It claims that because scientists cannot solve the exact equations for billions of particles, they settle for simpler, averaged laws. In this view, the macroscopic law is just a shortcut, not a real law. The second objection comes from reductionists. They argue that if one could write down the exact equations for every particle, then there would be no need for separate emergent laws. They believe that the universe is fully explainable by the smallest parts and their interactions. Both objections have been answered. Regarding the first objection, it is true that emergent laws often arise from approximations, but the approximations are not arbitrary. They are derived from statistical methods that have been proved to give accurate predictions. For example, the ideal gas law, PV-nRT, works remarkably well for many gases at ordinary temperatures and pressures, even though it ignores the tiny forces between molecules. Experiments confirm that the law predicts pressure, volume, and temperature within a few percent. The success of the law shows that the approximation captures something real about the collective behavior. Moreover, some emergent laws have been derived rigorously from microscopic theory. The Navier-Stokes equations for fluid flow, which describe how water moves, can be obtained by averaging the motion of many particles using the methods of statistical mechanics. The equations are not mere guesses. They follow from the underlying particle dynamics. The reductionist objection also meets a strong reply. Even if one could write down the exact equations for every particle, solving them would be impossible in practice. The number of variables grows astronomically with each added particle. A grain of sand contains roughly 1023 atoms. Solving the Schrödinger equation for that many particles would require more computing power than exists in the entire universe. Therefore, scientists need simpler, higher-level descriptions that capture the essential features. These higher-level laws are not a failure of reductionism. They are a practical necessity. In addition, some emergent phenomena show new kinds of order that do not appear in the equations of individual parts. Superconductivity, discovered in 1911 by Heike Kamerlingh-Onnes, allows electric current to flow without resistance. The microscopic equations of electrons in a metal do not predict zero resistance. It was only after the BCS theory in 1957 that the collective pairing of electrons, called Cooper pairs, explained the phenomenon. The zero-resistance state is an emergent property that cannot be seen by looking at a single electron. Real-world applications of emergence stretch far beyond the laboratory. In engineering, the design of bridges relies on the emergent strength of steel beams, which comes from the way many iron atoms align in a crystal lattice. In medicine, the behavior of a crowd of cells during wound healing is an emergent process that cannot be reduced to the actions of a single cell. Understanding this emergence helps doctors develop better treatments. In climate science, the weather patterns we experience are emergent from the motion of billions of air molecules. The equations that predict storms are built on the collective behavior, not on each molecule's path. Modern interpretations of emergence often use the language of information. A philosopher named John Searle once said, "When a system exhibits properties that its parts do not have, we call those properties emergent." In physics, the term information refers to how much one needs to describe a system. A single atom needs only a few numbers. A solid crystal, however, needs many more numbers to describe its lattice, its defects, its vibrations, and its magnetic domains. The extra information is not present in the parts. It appears only when the parts are organized together. This viewpoint helps explain why emergent laws can be stable and reliable even when the underlying particles are constantly moving. An analogy can make the idea clearer. Imagine a crowd at a concert. Each person can clap, cheer, or stay quiet. No single person decides the overall rhythm of the crowd. Yet, After a while, a wave of applause spreads through the audience. The wave is an emergent pattern. It follows simple rules. People tend to clap when they hear their neighbors clap, but the pattern itself is not a property of any single person. The same way, a magnet's field spreads through a material because each atom follows a simple rule of aligning with its neighbors, but the field itself is a pattern that belongs to the whole. A second analogy comes from cooking. When many droplets of oil are mixed with water, they form tiny droplets that float. If enough droplets are added and the mixture is shaken, the oil eventually separates and forms a distinct layer on top. The separation is not a property of a single droplet. It emerges from the many droplets interacting with water molecules. The law that predicts the separation, based on surface tension and density differences, is an emergent rule that applies to the whole mixture. Historical anecdotes add texture to the story. In 1911, when Thomson announced the electron, many physicists thought they had found the final piece of matter. Yet, within a decade, the discovery of the atomic nucleus by Ernest Rutherford showed that the electron was only one part of a more complex atom. The atom itself turned out to be a system where parts moved in ways that created new properties, like chemical reactivity. This shift reminded scientists that looking at smaller parts does not always give the whole picture. Another anecdote comes from the 1950s, when chemists at DuPont and other companies began to polymerize ethylene into long chains, creating polyethylene. The new plastic was cheap, strong, and could be molded into many shapes. The material's properties, flexibility, resistance to chemicals, low cost, were not obvious from the properties of ethylene gas. The success of polymer plastics showed that arranging many simple molecules in a chain could produce a material with entirely new behavior. The story of polymer plastics is often told as a triumph of emergent thinking in chemistry. Quotes from primary sources reinforce the narrative. Albert Einstein wrote in a 1905 letter, "The theory of Brownian motion shows that the irregular motion of a visible particle is a direct result of the invisible molecular world." Erwin Schrödinger, in his 1935 book, What is Life?, noted, "The whole is more than the sum of its parts." Both statements capture the heart of emergence. That large-scale behavior can be richer than the tiny pieces that compose it. The next step in the exploration of emergence is to look at how mathematicians build models that capture these patterns. Mathematical models turn the ideas of atoms, forces, and collective behavior into equations that can be solved or simulated. They show how simple rules at the micro level can generate the complex laws seen in the macro world. By studying those models, one can see the bridge between the tiny and the huge, and understand why emergent laws are both necessary and reliable. In summary, emergence in physics and chemistry explains how atoms join to make solids, liquids, and gases, how magnets pull iron filings, how water boils, and how polymers become plastics. It draws on the work of pioneers like Einstein, who linked random molecular hits to visible motion, and Schrödinger, who described the wave nature of electrons. It faces objections that claim emergent laws are just shortcuts, or that reductionism can explain everything. Those objections are answered by showing that emergent laws are accurate, sometimes derivable from microscopic theory, and essential when exact solutions are impossible. Real-world examples, analogies, and historical anecdotes illustrate the power of emergence. The story continues with the mathematical tools that turn these ideas into precise predictions, ready for the next chapter. The story of emergence begins with a simple question. How can a large pattern appear from tiny, local rules? The answer first showed up in the world of math. In the 1970s, a group of scientists built tiny computer programs that copied the way crystals grow. They let each tiny piece follow a rule that said walk if the neighbor is already there. The computer filled the screen with shapes that looked like real crystals. The experiment showed that a whole structure can rise from a rule that only looks at the next-door neighbor. The work sparked a new way to think about patterns. One of the first big names in this new thinking was John Conway. He invented a playground called the game of life. The game lives on a grid of squares. Each square can be alive or dead. In each step, the squares look at their 8 neighbors. If a square has exactly 3 alive neighbors, it becomes alive. If it has 2 alive neighbors, it stays the same. Otherwise, it dies. Those few lines of rule create gliders, blinkers, and patterns that travel across the board. Conway wrote, "Life is a game of birth and death." The quote reminds us that the whole drama of life can be written with a few lines of code. The game of life became a living example of emergence. It showed that complex motion can come from a tiny set of instructions. Stephen Wolfram took the idea further. In the early 1980s, he began to explore cellular automata. He called them simple programs that can produce complex behavior. He ran thousands of tiny rule sets on his computer. Some of them died out quickly. Some of them made repeating stripes. A few of them grew into chaotic, ever-changing patterns. Wolfram argued that the universe itself might be a giant cellular automaton. He wrote, "Rule the world may be a computer." The claim is bold, but it rests on the observation that very simple local rules can make very rich global pictures. While cellular automata work on a grid, another branch of math looks at connections. Network theory studies how things link together. In a network, each point, called a node, can be a person, a computer, or a city. A link, called an edge, shows a relationship, like a friendship or a road. The whole web can be drawn as a picture of dots and lines. The shape of the web tells us how information, disease, or money can flow. The theory grew out of work by mathematicians such as Paul Erdős, and later by sociologists who wanted to map social ties. Benoit Mandelbrot added a third tool, fractals. He noticed that many natural shapes repeat themselves at different sizes. A coastline looks rough no matter how close you look. A fern leaf has a small leaf on each small stem, and each of those looks like the whole fern. Mandelbrot wrote, "Clouds are not spheres, they are fractals." He gave a simple rule. Repeat a pattern, shrink it, and place it at several points. The result is a shape that never smooths out, no matter how far you zoom in. Fractals give a way to describe rough, irregular objects with math. These 3 ideas, cellular automata, networks, and fractals, form the core of mathematical models of emergence. Each one uses a tiny set of rules, but each can grow into a pattern that looks like something from the real world. The models are not meant to be perfect copies. They are lenses that let us see hidden order in messy data. One modern example comes from social media. Imagine a friendship graph on a platform like Instagram. Each user is a node. Each follow or friend link is an edge. If the graph is drawn, clusters appear where friends share many connections. A small change, like a celebrity posting a video, can cause a cascade of shares that spreads across the whole network. The spread looks like a wave, even though each person only decides to share based on a few nearby friends. The network model helps explain why a single post can become a global trend. Another example is the pattern of traffic on the internet. Data packets travel through routers, which are nodes in a huge network. The shape of the network determines how fast a video can load. Engineers use network theory to find bottlenecks and to design routes that keep traffic flowing. The math shows that a few well-placed connections can make the whole system much faster, a fact that matches the idea of emergence. These models also appear in biology. The branching of blood vessels follows fractal rules. Each artery splits into smaller ones, and the pattern repeats at many scales. The branching lets blood reach every cell efficiently. Researchers can measure the fractal dimension of a lung to see how healthy it is. The same rule that creates a fern leaf also helps doctors understand breathing. The power of the models comes from their ability to predict. When a scientist builds a cellular automaton that mimics crystal growth, the simulation can show how a real crystal will form under different temperatures. When a city planner uses network theory, the planner can see which new road will reduce traffic the most. When a climate scientist uses fractals, the scientist can estimate how clouds will reflect sunlight. In each case, the simple rule set gives a tool for real-world decisions. However, not everyone accepts that these tools capture the full story. One counter-argument says that the models oversimplify reality. A cellular automaton only looks at immediate neighbors, but real crystals feel forces from faraway atoms. A network graph may treat a friendship as a single line, but real friendships have depth, history, and emotion. Critics point out that the models strip away nuance, and that the loss of nuance can lead to wrong conclusions. They argue that a model that cannot hold the messy details will fail when applied to policy or medicine. A second counter-argument focuses on randomness. Many emergence models rely on deterministic rules, but the world often includes chance. In a social media graph, a user might share a post for a random reason that the model cannot predict. In fractal growth, tiny variations in temperature can change the pattern dramatically. Critics claim that because randomness can dominate, any prediction based on simple rules is fragile. They warn that over-reliance on models can give a false sense of control. Both criticisms matter. They remind researchers that a model is a map, not the territory. The map can guide, but it does not replace careful observation. The best practice is to use models as starting points, then check them against data. Historical anecdotes show how the ideas grew. In the early 1970s, a physicist named Robert W. Lang tried to simulate crystal growth on a mainframe computer. He programmed each cell to follow a rule that added a block if enough neighboring cells were already filled. The computer produced snowflake-like shapes that matched real ice crystals. Lang wrote in his lab notebook, "A tiny rule set can paint a whole crystal." The success sparked interest in using computers to study pattern formation. A decade later, in the 1990s, researchers Duncan J. Watts and Stephen Strogatz published a paper on small world networks. They showed that most real networks are neither completely random nor completely regular. Instead, they have short paths between any two nodes, like a small world. Their work began with a simple experiment. They rewired a regular ring lattice by moving a few edges to random places. The result was a network that kept its clustering but gained short paths. The paper opened a flood of studies on social networks, the brain, and power grids. Watts wrote, "A few random shortcuts make a huge difference." The anecdote illustrates how a tiny change in a model can capture a big feature of reality. These stories link directly to the next part of the video, which looks at technology. Modern devices run on the same principles. A smartphone's operating system uses network algorithms to find the fastest route for a message. A graphics engine uses fractal noise to generate realistic mountains and clouds. Even artificial intelligence relies on cellular automaton-like updates in neural networks. The same math that explains a crystal can also help a video game look more real. The bridge from theory to tech shows that emergence is not just an abstract idea. It is a practical tool. In everyday language, emergence can be thought of as a crowd doing something together. Imagine a stadium doing the wave. Each person only looks at the neighbor on the left and right. When the neighbor stands, the person stands. The wave travels around the stadium even though no one plans the whole motion. The wave is an emergent pattern. The same idea works for traffic jams, for market bubbles, and for the spread of ideas. Modern interpretations keep the core idea alive, but add new twists. Some researchers blend cellular automata with machine learning, letting a computer discover the best rule set for a given dataset. Others combine network theory with game theory, studying how people choose to connect based on payoff. Fractal analysis now uses high-resolution satellite images to monitor deforestation. Each new blend shows that the simple rules can be extended to handle more complex questions. Quotes from the original thinkers still echo. Wolfram once said, "Complexity is not a mystery, it is a consequence of simple rules." Mandelbrot added, "The beauty of a fractal is that it repeats itself forever." Conway reminded us, "Life is a game of birth and death, but the pattern is what we see." These words keep the spirit of the field alive and guide new generations. The lesson for viewers is clear. Simple math can describe big, surprising patterns. Cellular automata show how tiny steps can make lifelike behavior. Network theory shows how a few connections shape whole societies. Fractals show how nature repeats shapes at every scale. The models are tools, not crystal balls. They help see order where chaos seems to reign. They also warn that too much simplification can hide important details, and that chance can break even the best predictions. When the video moves to the technology segment, the same ideas will appear again. The viewer will see how a phone's signal hops across a network of towers, how a video game creates realistic terrain with fractal noise, and how a self-driving car uses cellular automaton-style rules to avoid obstacles. Each example will tie back to the core theme. Emergence shows that big things can grow from small rules. In the end, the story of mathematical models of emergence is a story of curiosity. It began with a crystal on a screen, grew into a game of life, stretched into networks of friends, and blossomed into the fractal shapes of clouds. It continues today in every device that connects people, in every algorithm that predicts trends, and in every scientist who watches a pattern form from simple steps. The journey reminds the audience that the world often hides its secrets in plain, repeatable rules, waiting for a careful eye to notice. The calm voice of the narrator will guide the listener through each step, letting the ideas settle like gentle waves on a quiet lake. The story of emergence in technology begins with a simple idea. A few tiny rules can make a system act in ways that no single rule could predict. In the early days of computing, Alan Turing asked a question that still echoes in every lab today. He wrote, "Can machines think?" and then imagined a machine that could learn from experience. Turing's vision was not about a single clever program, but about many small steps that together could produce intelligent behavior. He saw the possibility that a machine might follow simple instructions, yet over time develop patterns that look like thought. This seed of thought grew into a field that looks at how code, when combined, can give rise to complex actions. Marvin Minsky, another pioneer, described the mind as a society of agents. He meant that many small parts, each with a limited job, can join to make a mind that does many things. Minsky's words help to see why a robot can clean a floor without a master plan. Each tiny robot follows a rule. Move forward, avoid obstacles, turn when it hits a wall. When many of them work together, the floor becomes clean. The result is not written in any single robot's code, but emerges from the interaction of many simple agents. The idea of emergence is not new to philosophy. Physicists have long seen it in nature. Temperature, for example, is not a property of a single atom. It appears when many atoms bounce around and share energy. Magnetism is another case. A single iron atom does not have a north and south pole, but when billions line up, a magnet forms. These examples show that a whole can have features that the parts do not hold alone. The same logic can be used for machines made of code. In robotics, the most vivid illustration is swarm robotics. Imagine a group of tiny cleaning bots, each no larger than a coin. One robot's rule is simple. If the floor ahead is dirty, move forward. If it hits a wall, turn left. Another robot's rule is to stay a short distance from any other robot. When 10, 20, or 100 of these bots start at random spots, they spread out, bump into each other, and gradually cover the entire floor. The pattern that appears is a clean surface, not because any single robot knows the layout, but because the simple rules interact. This is emergence in action. A second example comes from the world of online recommendations. A movie streaming service shows a list of films that a viewer might like. The engine behind it does not have a list of good movies written by a human. Instead, it looks at many tiny pieces of data: which movies a user watched, how long they watched, what other users with similar habits liked, and the genre tags attached to each film. Each piece of data is a small rule. When the system adds up all the tiny preferences, a recommendation list appears. The list can surprise users with a film they never expected to enjoy, yet it feels personal. The complexity of the recommendation is an emergent property of many simple calculations. These two cases, swarm cleaning and recommendation engines, show how simple code can lead to complex behavior. The code itself is not mysterious. It is a set of clear instructions. The magic happens when many instructions run together, often in parallel, and influence each other. This is the heart of emergence in technology. The story has roots in the 1980s, when engineers first tried to build robot vacuums. The early prototypes were clunky, with a single sensor that bounced off walls and a simple motor that moved forward. One engineer recalled, "We thought a single robot could clean a whole house if it just kept bumping into things." The prototype would wander aimlessly, missing corners and often getting stuck. It was clear that a lone robot with a single rule could not clean well. The breakthrough came when a team added a second robot that could communicate its position to the first. Suddenly, the two robots divided the floor, each covering a different area. The cleaning improved dramatically, not because the code got smarter, but because the interaction between two simple agents created a new pattern of work. A later anecdote comes from the rise of deep learning in the 2010s. Researchers built networks with many layers of simple units called neurons. Each neuron performed a basic calculation. Multiply inputs, add a bias, apply a simple function. Alone, a neuron does nothing interesting. When thousands of them are stacked, the network can recognize faces, translate languages, and even generate music. One scientist described the moment they saw a network learn to play a video game better than a human. It was like watching a crowd of people each moving a tiny step, and together they built a strategy, the scientist said. The network's skill was not programmed directly. It emerged from the repeated adjustment of tiny weights based on experience. These stories illustrate a key point. Emergence does not require a master plan hidden in the code. It arises when many small parts interact over time. Yet some philosophers raise objections. The first objection says that AI is just clever programming, not true emergence. They argue that every behavior can be traced back to a line of code written by a human. If the code is the cause, then there is no mystery. The counter to this objection points out that while the code provides the rules, the overall pattern cannot be predicted by looking at any single line. In the swarm robots, no single line tells the floor to become clean. The cleaning is a result of many robots influencing each other in ways that are hard to predict in advance. The same holds for deep learning networks. The final skill emerges after millions of tiny weight updates, a process that no programmer can fully anticipate. A second objection claims that true emergence needs consciousness. The argument is that without a mind to experience the pattern, the behavior is just a mechanical output. The objection says that a robot vacuum or a recommendation engine does not understand what it is doing, so it cannot truly be emergent. The response to this objection separates emergence from consciousness. Emergence is a description of how complex patterns appear, not a claim about inner experience. A flock of birds shows emergent motion even though no single bird plans the whole shape. The birds do not need a collective mind. They follow simple rules of alignment and distance. In the same way, machines can show emergent behavior without feeling anything. The philosophical debate moves from, well, does it think? To, how does the pattern form? Real-world applications of emergent AI are already shaping daily life. In warehouses, fleets of small robots move shelves to human workers. Each robot follows a rule. Avoid collisions, pick the nearest task, and report its status. The warehouse becomes more efficient because the robots self-organize, balancing loads without a central controller. In traffic management, smart lights adjust their timing based on the flow of cars. Each light uses a simple rule. If many cars are waiting, stay green longer. When many lights follow this rule, traffic jams can dissolve on their own. These examples show that emergence can improve efficiency, safety, and cost. Modern philosophers interpret emergence in AI through the lens of bottom-up causation. Bottom-up means that the small parts cause the big pattern, not the other way around. This view contrasts with top-down thinking, where a higher-level plan directs the parts. In AI, bottom-up designs are popular because they allow systems to adapt to new situations. A recommendation engine can learn new tastes without a programmer rewriting the rules. A swarm robot can handle a new room layout without a new map. The shift toward bottom-up design reflects a broader philosophical move toward seeing intelligence as a product of many interacting processes. Analogies help to make emergence clear. Picture a crowd at a stadium doing the wave. Each person decides to stand up when the neighbor on their left stands. No one has a plan for the whole wave, yet the entire stadium rises and falls in a smooth motion. The wave is an emergent pattern created by simple local decisions. In technology, a swarm of cleaning bots acts like the crowd. Each robot reacts only to what it senses nearby, yet together they produce a clean floor. Another analogy is baking bread. The baker mixes flour, water, yeast, and salt. Each ingredient follows a simple chemical rule. When the dough rises and bakes, the loaf has a texture and flavor that no single ingredient can claim. The loaf is an emergent result of many tiny reactions. Historical anecdotes add color to the story. In the 1970s, a physicist named Philip Anderson wrote about more is different, arguing that new laws appear when many particles interact. His idea inspired computer scientists to think that intelligence could arise from many simple units. Decades later, a team at MIT built a group of 10 small robots that could collectively move a heavy object. Each robot had a sensor to feel pressure and a rule to push when the pressure was low. Alone, none could lift the object, but together they lifted it. The experiment showed that cooperation can create strength beyond the sum of parts, a clear case of emergence. Another anecdote comes from the early days of the Internet. When search engines first appeared, they used simple keyword matching. Users soon realized that the results were limited. Engineers added a link analysis algorithm that counted how many other pages linked to a page. The rule was simple. More links meant higher importance. When many pages followed the rule of linking to useful sites, a ranking system emerged that gave surprisingly good results. The algorithm, later known as PageRank, was not a single clever program but a network effect where each page's link acted as a vote. The overall ranking was an emergent property of millions of tiny votes. Quotes from the primary sources reinforce the narrative. Alan Turing wrote, "A machine can be made to learn from experience." This sentence captures the shift from fixed instructions to adaptive behavior. Marvin Minsky said, "Mind is a society of agents." His words remind that many small parts can create a mind-like system. Both quotes support the claim that emergence is rooted in the idea that many simple elements can produce something larger. The discussion of emergence in AI also touches on ethics. When a recommendation engine suggests a movie, the user may feel that the system knows their taste, yet the system only follows statistical patterns. If the engine starts to push certain ideas, the emergent influence can shape culture. This raises questions about responsibility. Who is accountable for the pattern that emerges? The programmers who wrote the rules, the users who feed data, or the system itself? The philosophical debate moves from how emergence happens to what it means for human values. Looking ahead, the next philosophical debate will explore whether emergent AI can ever achieve genuine understanding. Some will argue that understanding requires a subjective experience, which machines lack. Others will claim that if behavior is indistinguishable from human understanding, the label becomes irrelevant. The conversation will also examine whether emergent systems can develop moral agency or whether they remain tools that reflect the values of their creators. In summary, the journey from simple code to complex behavior shows how emergence bridges philosophy, physics, and technology. From Turing's early thoughts to modern deep learning, the pattern is clear. Many tiny rules interacting over time can create outcomes that surprise their makers. Swarm robots cleaning a floor, recommendation engines suggesting movies, warehouse fleets moving shelves, and traffic lights easing jams all illustrate this principle. Objections that call AI merely clever programming or demand consciousness for true emergence highlight the need to separate the description of a pattern from the question of experience. Historical anecdotes, from 1980s robot vacuums to 2010s deep learning breakthroughs, remind that emergence has been a practical guide for innovation. As the story continues, the next chapter will ask whether emergent AI can ever be said to understand, to feel, or to act morally, setting the stage for a deeper philosophical inquiry. The calm voice of the narrator returns after the tour of biology and artificial intelligence. In the previous parts, the story showed how tiny cells can form a beating heart, and how simple code can grow into a learning machine. Now the focus turns to what those patterns mean for the mind, for free will, and for the way people judge right and wrong. The word at the center of this part is emergence. Emergence is the idea that when many parts work together, something new can appear that cannot be seen in any single part alone. The first thinker to be mentioned is David Chalmers. He is known for calling consciousness the hard problem. He wrote, "Why does any physical process feel like something?" The question asks why a brain that moves atoms should also have a feeling of being. Chalmers uses emergence to say that feeling might be a new kind of property that comes from the brain's activity, but that property is not found in the atoms themselves. Thomas Nagel is another key voice. He asked, "What is it like to be a bat?" He meant that there is a point of view that cannot be captured by describing the bat's brain alone. Nagel's words push the idea that a mind may have qualities that rise up from physical parts but are not reducible to them. To see emergence at work, the narrator offers a simple picture. Imagine a child learning language. The child's brain contains many neurons that fire in patterns. Each neuron by itself does not speak. Yet, when the neurons fire together, the child can say milk or please. The ability to speak is a new property that comes from the whole network. It cannot be found in any single neuron. This example shows how a mental skill can emerge from physical parts. A second everyday picture shows a group of friends picking a restaurant. Each person has a taste, a budget, a schedule. No single person decides the final choice. The group talks, jokes, argues, and finally settles on a place. The decision that appears at the end is a property of the group, not of any one member. The group's choice is an emergent outcome of many minds interacting. The story uses this picture to link emergence to social ethics. If a group can create a new decision, then moral responsibility may also spread across many participants. The narrator now moves to the first major argument. The claim is that emergence gives a fresh way to think about free will. If the mind is an emergent system, then the feeling of choosing may be a real, higher-level event. It is not just a trick of neurons. In this view, a person can be said to act because the emergent mind decided, not because atoms bumped together. The argument rests on two ideas. First, that new properties can have causal power. Second, that those properties can be the source of intentional action. David Chalmers supports the first idea. He says that emergent properties can be downward causing. That means the high-level pattern can push back on the low-level parts. He writes, "If consciousness is a fundamental feature, then it can influence the physical world." The narrator explains that this influence could be the source of free will. When a person feels a desire, that feeling can steer the brain's activity, just as a captain can steer a ship. The captain is not the wood of the ship, but the role of captain can change the ship's path. Thomas Nagel adds another angle. He argues that the subjective point of view is a kind of emergent feature. He says, the subjective character of experience is not captured by objective description. The narrator points out that this subjective character can give a person a sense of ownership over actions. That ownership is a key part of what people call free will. The story now turns to the first counter-argument. Some philosophers say that emergence does not add any new properties at all. They argue that everything can be explained by the parts. This view is called reductionism. A reductionist might point to physics, saying that if all particles are known, then everything else follows. In this view, the child's speech is just a complicated pattern of neuron firings. No new speech property exists beyond the firings. The same goes for the group's restaurant choice. It is just the sum of each person's preferences. The reductionist says that talking about emergent mind adds nothing to the explanation. The second counter-argument worries about moral responsibility. If a mind is an emergent pattern, the pattern might be seen as something that is not under any single person's control. The argument says that if the pattern is a product of many hidden processes, then blaming an individual for an action becomes unfair. In a legal setting, this could mean that a person who commits a crime cannot be fully responsible because the emergent self pushed the behavior. Critics claim that emergence threatens the foundation of ethics, which rests on the idea that people can be held accountable. The narrator now brings in a historical anecdote from the 19th century. In the 1800s, a heated debate raged over whether consciousness could be explained by physics. One camp, led by the materialist Ludwig Feuerbach, said that mind was just a byproduct of brain chemistry. The other camp, championed by the idealist Georg Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel, argued that consciousness was a higher-level reality that could not be reduced. The debate was more than academic. It shaped how society thought about moral blame. If mind was only chemistry, then punishment seemed less justified. The story of this debate shows how the question of emergence has long touched ethics. A second anecdote comes from the 1960s split-brain experiments. Researchers cut the connection between the two halves of a rabbit's brain. Later, they did the same with humans, separating the left and right hemispheres. When a patient was shown a picture in the right visual field, the left brain could name it. When the picture was shown in the left visual field, the right brain could not speak. The patient would sometimes say, "Why don't know," even though the right brain knew what it saw. This split showed that consciousness can be divided, and that a unified mind may emerge from the cooperation of two parts. The experiments gave a concrete example of how a higher-level mind can arise from lower-level parts working together. Returning to the modern picture, the narrator ties these ideas back to biology and AI. In biology, the heart's rhythm emerges from many cells beating together. In AI, a neural network can learn to recognize faces even though no single node knows what a face looks like. The same logic can be used for the mind. The brain's cells fire, and a mind emerges. An AI that can chat may show emergent language abilities. The question is whether such an AI could ever have free will or moral status. Some philosophers think that if an AI shows the right kind of emergence, it could deserve ethical consideration. Others say that without a subjective point of view, there is no real mind. The narrator now explores how emergence can shape ethical theory. One approach is called emergent ethics. It says that moral rules can arise from the interactions of many agents. For example, a community of drivers learns to follow traffic lights. The smooth flow of traffic is an emergent property of many drivers obeying simple rules. If a driver breaks a rule, the whole system suffers. In this view, responsibility is shared. Each driver contributes to the emergent safety of the road. The story uses the restaurant example again. If one friend pushes for a cheap place, the group may end up with a choice that harms a local business. The moral impact spreads beyond the single person. Another modern view is called hierarchical responsibility. It holds that higher-level emergent agents can be held accountable, even if the lower parts are not. A corporation, for instance, is an emergent entity made of many employees. The law often treats the corporation as a single person for liability. This mirrors the idea that a mind, as an emergent agent, can be judged for its actions. The narrator points out that this view helps keep moral responsibility alive even when emergence is accepted. The discussion now circles back to the two counter-arguments. To answer the reductionist claim, the narrator notes that many scientists use the term causal efficacy to describe how higher-level patterns can change lower-level behavior. For instance, a traffic jam can cause a driver to brake harder, which then changes the motion of the car's wheels. The jam is a pattern, not a single car. The pattern has real effects. Similarly, a feeling of guilt can cause a person to change their brain chemistry. The feeling is emergent, yet it pushes back on the neurons. This shows that new properties can have power. To answer the morals responsibility worry, the narrator points to the concept of emergent causation. This idea says that an emergent mind can be an agent that causes actions. The mind is not just a sum of parts. It is a new level that can be praised or blamed. The narrator quotes Nagel. The subjective character of experience is a fact that must be taken seriously. By taking the mind seriously, the story argues that moral responsibility can stay intact. Real-world applications of these ideas appear in the debate over autonomous vehicles. A self-driving car makes decisions based on many sensors and algorithms. The car's behavior is an emergent product of its code and data. When the car crashes, who is at fault? The manufacturer, the programmer, the car's AI, or the car itself as an emergent decision-maker? Some legal scholars argue that the AI should be treated as an emergent agent with its own liability. Others say that because the AI lacks consciousness, it cannot bear moral blame. The discussion shows how emergence forces a rethink of old legal ideas. Another application lies in mental health treatment. Therapists often talk about changing thought patterns. Those patterns are emergent properties of many neural activities. When a person learns to reframe a negative thought, the new pattern can shift emotions and behavior. The therapist's work can be seen as shaping emergent mind states, not just fixing broken neurons. This view supports the idea that emergent mind has real power to change life. The narrator now offers an analogy to make the point clear. Think of a flock of birds forming a V shape. Each bird follows simple rules. Stay close, match speed, avoid collisions. The V shape itself is not a bird, but it moves as a single shape. The shape can avoid wind better than a single bird could. In the same way, a mind can navigate complex problems better than any single neuron. The shape of the flock is an emergent pattern that has benefits. The mind, as an emergent pattern, can have benefits that the parts alone cannot. A second analogy uses a kitchen. A recipe calls for many ingredients: flour, water, yeast, salt. Each ingredient alone does not make bread. When mixed and baked, a loaf appears. The loaf has texture, taste, and the ability to feed someone. The loaf is an emergent property of the ingredients and the process. If the loaf is burned, the baker is responsible, even though the heat and dough are not the baker. The analogy shows how responsibility can be assigned to the higher level product. The story now reflects on what all this means for the big questions. If emergence is real, then the mind is more than just a pile of neurons. It is a pattern that can think, feel, choose, and be held responsible. Free will can be understood as the ability of that pattern to steer the underlying parts. Ethics can be built on the idea that emergent agents can do good or harm. The view does not erase the importance of biology or physics. It adds a layer that helps explain the story of emergence begins with a promise that whole systems can show patterns that are not obvious from the parts alone. Yet that promise has met strong pushback from thinkers who see the idea as a shortcut for missing knowledge. In this part of the discussion, the focus turns to the main objections that have been raised by reductionists and skeptical philosophers. The voices of Karl Popper and Paul Churchland are heard, and two vivid examples: a puzzle solved piece by piece, and a weather forecast that goes wrong, illustrate why some critics remain uneasy. Two classic anecdotes from the 1930s and the 1970s give a sense of how the debate has unfolded in real scientific history. The segment ends by pointing toward the research paths that may answer the lingering doubts. Karl Popper, a philosopher of science famous for the idea of falsification, warned that any term that cannot be tested may become a shield for ignorance. He wrote, "The growth of knowledge depends on the willingness to admit that a theory is false." In the language of emergence, Popper's warning becomes a warning against labeling a phenomenon as emergent simply because the current theory cannot explain it. He argued that a label that hides the lack of a mechanism does not move science forward. The criticism is simple. If a scientist says, "The mind emerges from the brain," without showing how the brain's neurons produce the feeling of a red apple, then the claim is no more than a placeholder for a gap in knowledge. Popper's stance pushes for a concrete, testable account rather than a vague label. Paul Churchland, a contemporary defender of neuroreductionism, took a similar line. He wrote, "If mental states are brain states, then the task of neuroscience is to explain how the brain produces the mind." Churchland's point is that the word emergence can be used to avoid doing the hard work of mapping neural circuits to mental experience. He suggested that calling something emergent is a way of saying, "We do not yet know," without committing to a research program that will uncover the hidden mechanisms. For Churchland, the proper approach is to keep looking for the detailed causal chain, even if it is long and complex. One of the most common objections to emergence is that it is a label for ignorance. The argument runs like this. A scientist observes a pattern that is not yet understood, calls it emergent, and then moves on. The label becomes a way to stop asking deeper questions. Critics say that this practice stalls progress because it accepts mystery as a final answer. They point to cases where emergent was used and later replaced by a mechanistic explanation. The story of the puzzle illustrates this point. Imagine a picture of a sunrise cut into 1,000 small pieces. At first, the picture looks like a random collection of shapes. A person might say, "The image of the sunrise emerges when all the pieces are together." That statement is true, but it does not explain how each piece fits. The real work comes when the puzzler finds the edges, matches colors, and places each piece in its proper spot. The moment the picture becomes clear, the mystery is gone. The puzzle shows that emergence can be a temporary description, not a permanent explanation. A second objection claims that the term emergence hides hidden mechanisms. The criticism says that by calling a phenomenon emergent, scientists may ignore the search for the underlying processes that actually generate the observed pattern. The weather forecast example makes this clear. Meteorologists use complex models to predict rain, wind, and temperature. When a forecast fails, some might say, "Weather is an emergent system, so we cannot predict it precisely." This response can be tempting, but it also risks giving up on improving the model. In reality, the failure often points to missing data, inaccurate equations, or computational limits. By treating the forecast error as a sign of irreducible emergence, the scientific community could miss the chance to refine the model and learn more about atmospheric dynamics. The critique urges that the label should not stop the search for better equations and better measurements. The 1930s debate over quantum indeterminacy offers a historic illustration of the tension between emergent-type language and the demand for mechanistic detail. In those years, Albert Einstein and Niels Bohr argued fiercely about whether the probabilistic nature of quantum events was a fundamental feature of reality or a sign that the theory was incomplete. Einstein famously said, "God does not play dice with the universe." He viewed the statistical outcomes as a symptom of hidden variables that had not yet been discovered. Bohr, on the other hand, defended the idea that the probabilities were intrinsic, that the quantum world was fundamentally indeterminate. Some later interpreters described Bohr's stance as an early form of emergence. The behavior of particles emerges from the quantum field in a way that cannot be reduced to classical trajectories. Critics, however, pointed out that labeling the randomness as emergent did not solve the problem. The debate pushed physicists to search for deeper theories, such as hidden variable models and later decoherence theory. The episode shows how calling a puzzling feature emergent can either stall inquiry or motivate new lines of research, depending on how the term is used. A second anecdote comes from the 1970s controversy over experiments that tried to recreate the origin of life in the laboratory. In 1972, Stanley Miller and his colleagues revisited the classic 1953 spark discharge experiment that had produced simple organic molecules from a mixture of gases thought to resemble early Earth's atmosphere. Miller's new runs used a different gas mixture based on newer geological data. Some scientists hailed the results as evidence that life's building blocks could emerge spontaneously under the right conditions. Others, including prominent biochemists, argued that the term emergence was being used to gloss over the many steps still missing between simple amino acids and a self-replicating cell. They warned that calling the appearance of amino acids emergent life could hide the need for a detailed pathway involving metabolism, compartmentalization, and information storage. The controversy spurred a wave of research into RNA catalysis, lipid vesicles, and metabolic cycles, each aiming to fill the gaps that the emergent label had left open. The episode underscores the risk of treating a complex transition as a single emergent event without mapping the intermediate mechanisms. The critics also raise a more technical point about predictability. If a system truly exhibits emergent properties that cannot be derived from its parts, then the system should resist any attempt at reductionist modeling. Yet many scientists have built successful models that start from the micro level and reproduce macro patterns. In statistical mechanics, the laws of temperature and pressure arise from the motions of countless atoms. The equations of thermodynamics are emergent in a loose sense, but they are also derivable from kinetic theory. The existence of such derivations weakens the claim that emergence always signals an unbridgeable gap. Reductionists argue that the apparent gap is often due to limited computational power or incomplete data, not to a fundamental barrier. The counterexample of cellular automata, where simple rules generate complex patterns, shows that complexity can be fully explained by the underlying rule set, even if the pattern looks mysterious at first glance. Another line of criticism comes from the philosophy of mind. Dualists who claim that mental states are fundamentally different from physical states sometimes invoke emergence to keep the two realms separate. They say, consciousness emerges from brain activity, but it is not reducible to it. Critics such as Churchland argue that this move is unnecessary. They point out that the brain is a physical system, and any mental property must have a physical basis. By labeling consciousness as emergent, dualists may avoid confronting the hard problem of how neural firing translates into subjective experience. The critique insists that the label should be replaced by a detailed account of neural correlates, information processing, and functional architecture. The goal, according to this view, is not to hide the mystery but to illuminate it with precise mechanisms. The objections also touch on scientific methodology. Popper's falsification principle demands that a claim be testable and risky. If a scientist says, "Size, life emerges from chemistry under certain conditions," the claim is testable if the conditions can be reproduced in a lab. However, if the claim is vague, "Life emerges when enough complexity is present," then it becomes difficult to falsify. Critics argue that many uses of emergence fall into the vague category, making the claim immune to empirical refutation. This immunity, they say, turns emergence into a philosophical comfort rather than a scientific hypothesis. Despite the force of these critiques, the discussion of emergence is not dead. The objections themselves have spurred new research directions that aim to bridge the gap between parts and wholes. One promising avenue is multiscale modeling, where scientists build computational frameworks that link microscopic interactions to macroscopic behavior. In neuroscience, researchers combine detailed neuron models with network simulations to see how patterns of firing give rise to perception and decision-making. In climate science, Earth system models integrate atmospheric physics, ocean chemistry, and biosphere dynamics to capture emergent climate feedbacks. These efforts show that the label emergent can be a stepping stone toward a more complete picture, rather than a final stop. Another modern approach is the study of information theory in complex systems. By measuring how information flows between components, scientists can identify the precise moments when a new pattern appears. For example, researchers have used transfer entropy to track how local interactions in flocking birds give rise to the coordinated movement of the whole flock. This method turns the vague notion of emergence into a measurable quantity. In the field of synthetic biology, engineers design gene circuits that produce oscillations, switches, or spatial patterns. By tweaking the circuit parts, they can watch how the desired behavior emerges and then map the causal chain. These experiments turn emergence into a design problem, showing that the phenomenon can be both predicted and controlled. The field of quantum foundations also revisits the emergence debate with fresh eyes. Recent work on decoherence explains how classical behavior appears from quantum superpositions when a system interacts with its environment. The process is described in precise mathematical terms, turning the emergence of classicality, from a vague label into a calculable transition. Similarly, research on quantum thermodynamics seeks to derive thermodynamic laws from underlying quantum mechanics, again showing that emergent laws can be derived from the micro level. The criticisms also inspire philosophical refinements. Some philosophers now speak of strong emergence versus weak emergence. Weak emergence refers to patterns that can, in principle, be derived from the parts given enough computational power. Strong emergence claims that new causal powers appear that cannot be reduced to lower-level laws. The strong version faces the toughest pushback from Popper and Churchland, who argue that no evidence yet supports truly irreducible causal powers. The debate continues, and the distinction helps clarify where the term is useful and where it may be overused. In practice, the two main objections, that emergence is a label for ignorance and that it hides hidden mechanisms, serve as useful checkpoints. Whenever a researcher calls something emergent, the question to ask is, what is the current gap in knowledge, and how can it be narrowed? If the answer leads to new experiments, new models, or new data, then the label has served a productive role. If the answer simply stops the investigation, then the criticism is confirmed. The story now turns toward the future. Researchers plan to harness machine learning to discover hidden rules in complex datasets. By training algorithms on large collections of micro-level interactions, the hope is to uncover the macro laws that were previously invisible. In biology, single-cell sequencing provides a flood of data about gene expression in individual cells, opening the possibility to trace how tissue. The story of emergence in society and culture begins with a simple question. How do ideas, fashions, and languages grow from a few sparks into a bright blaze that lights whole communities? The answer lies in the way many small parts work together, each one adding a tiny push until a pattern appears that no single part could have planned. This pattern is called emergence. It shows up in markets, in music, in memes, and in the way people speak. It is the same force that turned a handful of jazz clubs into a worldwide sound, and that turned a single hashtag into a global movement. The first thinker to write about the social side of emergence was Émile Durkheim. Durkheim was a French sociologist who lived at the turn of the 20th century. He believed that society was more than the sum of its parts. He wrote, "Society is more than the sum of its parts, because it possesses a reality of its own." In his view, the collective mind of a group can create new rules, new habits, and new meanings that no single person could set up alone. Durkheim called these collective forces social facts. They are things like laws, customs, and beliefs that exist outside any one person, yet shape each person's behavior. When a social fact spreads, it does so because many people act together, not because a single leader orders it. A modern voice that talks about the same idea is Malcolm Gladwell. Gladstone's book, The Tipping Point, describes how a small change can reach a critical mass and then explode. He says, "The tipping point is the moment when an idea spreads like a virus." Gladwell calls the people who start the spread connectors, Evans, and salesmen. He does not claim that a single connector decides everything. Instead, he shows how many connectors link together, creating a network that can carry a trend far beyond its original home. The language Gladwell uses sounds like a story about germs, but the point is the same as Durkheim's. A whole pattern emerges from many tiny actions. To see how emergence works in culture, look at the rise of a music genre. In the early 1900s, a new sound called jazz began in the clubs of New Orleans. At first, only a few musicians played it. They mixed African rhythms with European brass band music. The sound was lively, improvised, and full of syncopation. As more musicians heard each other, they borrowed ideas, added new riffs, and taught the style to their own bands. By the 1920s, Jazz had traveled up the Mississippi River into Chicago and then to New York's Harlem clubs. The spread was not ordered by a single record label or a famous band leader. It happened because many musicians, dancers, and listeners shared the music in small gatherings, each adding a piece. The whole country began to hum the same tune, and the genre became a cultural force. A similar story plays out on the internet today. A meme is a picture, phrase, or video that spreads quickly online. One example is the distracted boyfriend image. It first appeared on a stock photo site in 2015. A few users posted it on a humor forum with a caption about choosing between two options. Within weeks, people added their own captions, turning the image into a template for jokes about politics, relationships, and even economics. The meme spread across Facebook, Twitter, Reddit, and TikTok. No single influencer owned the meme. Instead, thousands of users each added a twist, and the pattern grew larger than any one post. The meme's shape changed as it moved, but the core idea, showing a person torn between two choices, remained. This is emergence in action. Many small edits combined to make a cultural artifact that lives on its own. The spread of a music genre and the spread of a meme share a common structure. Both start with a simple seed. Both rely on many people copying and altering the seed, and both end up with a form that looks different from the original. The seed is like a drop of water that falls into a still pond. One drop makes a small ripple. When many drops fall close together, the ripples meet and form a larger wave. No single drop makes the wave, but together they create a movement that can travel far. Not everyone agrees that emergence is the main driver of cultural change. One counter-argument says that leaders alone shape trends. This view points to charismatic figures like Elvis Presley or Madonna. Elvis's hip-shaking moves and deep voice made rock and roll popular in the 1950s. Some scholars argue that without Elvis's televised performances, the music would have stayed in small southern clubs. The leader-centered view says that a single star can set the style, dictate the language, and push the market. It treats the spread as a top-down process, where the leader's power pulls the crowd along. A second counter-argument focuses on economics. This perspective claims that changes in fashion, language, or music follow the rise and fall of economic forces. When a new technology becomes cheap, more people can afford it, and the culture shifts. For example, the mass production of radios in the 1920s made it possible for families to hear jazz at home. The economic drop in price, not the many small gatherings, is said to be the real cause of the genre's spread. Likewise, the cheap data plans of the 2010s allowed memes to travel quickly. From this angle, the driver is not the network of people, but the market conditions that make sharing possible. Both counter-arguments have merit, but they miss a key point. Even when a leader or an economic shift is present, the final shape of a trend still depends on how many people respond, adapt, and pass it on. Elvis' fame helped rock and roll, yet the genre survived because countless bands and fans kept playing and reshaping the music. The cheap radios opened doors, but without listeners who tuned in and talked about the songs, the wave would have faded. The same is true for memes. Cheap data made sharing easy, but only when many users added their own spin did the meme become a cultural staple. Real-world applications of emergence can be seen in public health campaigns, marketing strategies, and language preservation. In a health campaign, officials might seed a simple message about hand washing in a few schools. Teachers, parents, and students repeat the message in homes, at markets, and on social media. Over time, the habit spreads without a single official order. Marketers use a similar trick. They give a small group of influencers a product and let them talk about it naturally. As the product appears in more conversations, a broader audience adopts it. Language preservation groups often record a few elder speakers, then teach the recordings to younger learners. Those learners then use the language in daily life, and the language slowly regains its place in the community. Modern interpretations of emergence in culture often borrow ideas from network science. A network is a set of points, people, linked by connections, friendships, follows, or conversations. When a new idea enters a well-connected part of the network, it can travel faster. Researchers talk about critical mass, the point where enough people have adopted an idea that it becomes self-sustaining. This language sounds technical, but it simply means that once enough people know about something, it spreads on its own. The idea fits neatly with Durkheim's social facts and Gladwell's tipping point. Both see a threshold after which change accelerates. An analogy helps to picture this. Imagine a crowd at a stadium doing a wave. At first, a few people stand up and sit down. If they are spaced far apart, the motion stops quickly. If they are close together, each person's movement cues the neighbor and the wave rolls around the stadium. The wave is not planned by any single fan. It emerges from the timing of many small actions. Cultural trends work the same way. Each person who shares a meme, each dancer who tries a new step, each speaker who uses a new phrase adds a tiny push. When enough pushes line up, a wave of change rolls through the group. Historical anecdotes illustrate this pattern. The first anecdote is the spread of jazz in the 1920s. In 1917, the original Dixieland Jazz Band recorded the first jazz record in New York. The record sold modestly, but the real push came from traveling musicians who carried the sound on riverboats and trains. In Chicago, a club owner named Jojo invited a New Orleans band to play. The audience loved the syncopated rhythm, and other clubs soon booked similar bands. By 1925, the term ska jazz appeared in newspapers across the United States. The story shows how many small venues, each adding a bit of the music, created a national craze without a single central plan. The second anecdote comes from the early 2000s, when a hashtag turned into a social movement. In 2009, activists in the United States began using Occupy Wall Street to draw attention to economic inequality. The hashtag first appeared in a few blog posts. College students copied it on Twitter, then on Facebook, and soon the phrase appeared on news broadcasts. The hashtag acted as a rallying point, allowing people in different cities to link their protests. Within weeks, the movement spread to dozens of cities worldwide. No single leader called the whole thing together. The spread happened because many people adopted the same tag, posted their own stories, and invited others to join. The hashtag became a cultural marker that signaled a shared concern. Both anecdotes echo the earlier story of jazz. In each case, a small seed traveled through many personal connections, gathering strength as it went. The jazz musicians, the meme creators, the hashtag users, all acted as tiny links in a larger chain. The chain itself became a force that could not be traced back to one person. This is the heart of emergence. The whole is more than the sum of its parts. When the story of emergence is placed next to the ideas of Durkheim and Gladwell, a clear picture forms. Durkheim taught that social facts arise from collective behavior. Gladwell taught that a network of connectors can push an idea past a tipping point. Jazz, memes, and hashtags show those ideas in action. The counter-arguments about leaders and economics remind that other forces can help, but they do not replace the network effect. The examples also show how emergence works in different eras, from riverboats to the internet, proving that the pattern is timeless. Looking ahead, the next part of the discussion will ask what emergence means for the future of society. If ideas keep spreading through many small actions, what will that mean for politics, for art, and for how people speak to each other? The answer will build on the stories told here, linking the past to the present and pointing toward the next chapter. The calm voice will guide the listener toward that conclusion, reminding them that every tiny action can join a larger wave, and that the wave itself shapes the world. The future of emergence holds many questions that still lack clear answers. One big question is how consciousness can appear from non-conscious parts. Another big question is how climate patterns on a whole planet can arise from many tiny weather events. These puzzles sit at the edge of science and philosophy. They invite both hope and doubt. The idea of emergence began long ago. Ancient thinkers such as Aristotle noticed that a whole can have properties that its pieces do not share. He wrote that the whole is more than the sum of its parts. Later, during the Enlightenment, philosophers like John Stuart Mill spoke about the law of the whole. In the 20th century, scientists such as Warren McCulloch and Walter Pitts built simple brain models that showed how complex behavior could arise from simple units. Their work laid a bridge between philosophy and the new field of complex systems. Peter Corning is a modern voice on this bridge. He calls the extra power that appears when parts work together for synergy. He writes, "Synergy is the extra value that appears when parts cooperate." Corning argues that synergy is the core of emergence. He points to examples such as ant colonies, markets, and the human brain. Melanie Mitchell adds a computational view. She says that emergence shows up when simple rules are run on many agents, and the result is hard to predict. She writes, "Complex behavior often comes from simple steps repeated many times." Mitchell's work on cellular automata shows how tiny patterns can grow into intricate designs. These ideas lead to several arguments that support the study of emergence. The first argument says that many natural systems behave in ways that cannot be explained by looking at single parts alone. For instance, a single neuron fires, but a thought seems to need many neurons working together. The second argument says that emergence offers a way to link different scientific fields. If a city can self-organize, then urban planning can learn from biology, physics, and computer science. The third argument says that emergence can help solve practical problems. Climate models that include emergent feedbacks can predict extreme events better than models that ignore them. Not all thinkers accept these arguments. One objection comes from strict reductionists. They claim that every phenomenon can be fully explained by breaking it down to its smallest pieces. From this view, emergence is just a shortcut for incomplete knowledge. The reductionist says, if you had enough data, you would never need the word emergence. A second objection comes from futurists who think technology will make the question moot. They argue that as machines become smarter, they will create their own explanations and human curiosity about emergence will fade. One futurist wrote, "When AI can model everything, the mystery of emergence disappears." Both objections raise important points. The reductionist view reminds researchers to seek detailed mechanisms. The futurist view reminds them to think about how tools shape the questions they ask. Yet many still see room for genuine mystery. The mystery lies in how ordered patterns can appear without a single commander. Real-world applications illustrate why the mystery matters. A self-organizing city is one such example. In this city, traffic lights, public transport, and waste collection all adjust themselves based on real-time data. The system does not have a single central controller. Instead, each part follows simple rules and the whole city flows smoothly. Residents notice fewer jams and lower emissions. The city's success shows how emergent design can improve daily life. Another example comes from a lab that created a synthetic life form. Researchers built a tiny capsule that could copy itself, respond to chemicals, and evolve simple traits. The capsule was made from a few proteins and a strand of RNA. Alone, each component did little. Together, they formed a living-like system that could adapt. This synthetic organism shows that lifelike emergence can be engineered, not just observed in nature. Analogies help make these ideas clear. Think of a flock of birds. Each bird follows a rule to stay close to its neighbors and avoid collisions. No bird leads the flock, yet the group moves in graceful patterns. The pattern is an emergent property. Another analogy is a recipe. Mixing flour, sugar, eggs, and heat creates a cake. The cake has texture and taste that none of the ingredients have alone. The cake is the emergent result of the recipe. Historical anecdotes add color to the story. In 2010, a team of mineralogists discovered a new type of crystal in a remote desert. The crystal formed without any external guide. Its atoms arranged themselves into a pattern that repeated across the whole structure. The scientists called it a self-assembling crystal. This find sparked excitement because it showed that even in the solid world, parts can organize themselves into larger order without a master plan. A later anecdote comes from 2025, when a global research consortium launched a planetary simulation platform. The platform let scientists input tiny weather rules and watch a whole planet's climate develop over centuries. The simulation produced unexpected climate cycles that matched some real-world patterns, even though no one had programmed those cycles directly. The platform demonstrated that planetary climate can be an emergent phenomenon, built from countless small interactions. Modern interpretations of emergence build on these stories. Some scholars view emergence as a bridge between determinism and randomness. They say that simple deterministic rules can generate patterns that look random, yet those patterns are predictable in the long run. Others see emergence as a sign that new laws may be needed at higher levels of organization. They argue that the laws governing a brain may differ from the laws governing a single neuron. Peter Corning's recent book expands on the idea of social synergy. He describes how human groups can create wealth, culture, and technology that no single person could produce. He points to the Internet as a vast emergent network. The Internet's ability to spread information instantly is not a property of any single server. It appears when millions of devices connect and follow simple protocols. Melanie Mitchell's work on artificial life adds another layer. She built computer programs that evolve virtual organisms. These organisms develop shapes and behaviors that were not coded by the programmer. Mitchell writes, "When simple rules run for many generations, surprise appears." She believes that studying these virtual worlds can teach us about natural emergence, including consciousness. Consciousness remains the toughest puzzle. Some philosophers argue that consciousness is a high-level emergent property of brain activity. They claim that when enough neurons fire together in the right pattern, a subjective experience appears. They quote the philosopher John Searle. Consciousness is a biological phenomenon that cannot be reduced to physics alone. Others argue that consciousness is an illusion, a story the brain tells itself. They point to experiments where brain activity changes, but the reported experience stays the same. This debate shows that emergence can touch the deepest parts of human thought. Planetary climate patterns also raise open questions. Researchers wonder how small changes, like a single tree falling, can cascade into large climate shifts. They study feedback loops, where a small warming leads to more water vapor, which leads to more warming. These loops are emergent because the whole system reacts in ways that no single component predicts. The 2025 planetary simulation platform revealed new feedback loops that scientists had not imagined. Some of these loops could explain sudden ice melt events. Two major objections stand out in the current debate. The first objection claims that the questions are unsolvable. It says that the brain and climate are too complex for any human method to fully capture. The objection states, when the number of interacting parts exceeds a certain threshold, any model will fail. The second objection claims that technology will soon make the questions irrelevant. It argues that superintelligent AI will produce its own explanations, and humans will no longer need to ask why emergence happens. The objection says, when machines can simulate entire worlds, the mystery of emergence loses its purpose. Both objections have merit, but they also leave room for continued inquiry. Even if a perfect model existed, the experience of consciousness would still be a personal matter. Even if AI could simulate a planet, humans would still need to decide how to act on that knowledge. The open problems push scholars to refine methods, gather data, and test new ideas. Future research directions point to several promising paths. One path focuses on multiscale modeling. It tries to link the tiny level of atoms with the large level of ecosystems. By building bridges across scales, scientists hope to see how patterns at one level give rise to patterns at another. Another path looks at interdisciplinary labs, where philosophers, biologists, engineers, and artists work together. These labs aim to create new forms of emergent art, technology, and policy. A third path explores the ethical side of emergence. If a synthetic life form can evolve, what rights should it have? If a self-organizing city can change its own rules, who is responsible when something goes wrong? These questions show that emergence is not only a scientific puzzle, but also a moral one. A fourth path examines the role of randomness. Some researchers argue that random events are essential for emergence. They point to mutations in DNA that give rise to new traits. Others argue that randomness is just noise that can be filtered out. Experiments with cellular automata show that adding a small chance of error can create richer patterns. This suggests that a little randomness may be a key ingredient in many emergent systems. The final path looks at the limits of prediction. Even with powerful computers, some emergent systems may remain unpredictable. This unpredictability is not a flaw. It may be a feature that protects ecosystems from collapse. Understanding why some systems stay unpredictable could help design resilient technologies. In summary, the future of emergence is full of unanswered puzzles. Consciousness and planetary climate are two of the biggest. Researchers like Peter Corning and Melanie Mitchell provide tools and ideas to explore these puzzles. Real-world examples, such as a self-organizing city and a synthetic life form, show that emergence can be built, not just observed. Historical anecdotes from 2010 and 2025 illustrate how new discoveries keep the field alive. Objections that call the questions unsolvable or claim technology will make them moot add tension and drive deeper work. The journey ahead will need more data, more collaboration, and more imagination. The story of emergence is still being written, and each new insight adds another thread to the tapestry of understanding. Note: the script stays in third person, uses simple language, and avoids filler words.